Right, we're getting started. So welcome to this introduction to NGD, the National Geographic Database from Ordnance Survey. This is the first in the set of five webinars that we've got. I'm Andrew Terry, Tech Director at Centre Maps, and just to do a quick bit of housekeeping, just to let you know, everyone should be muted. We are recording the webinar so that you can either share it or catch up later if there's anything you missed or want to watch again. This webinar isn't CPD certified, but there are a further four, which I'll mention in a minute, that are CPD ready. And although we're not taking any questions during the webinar, obviously do get in touch if you've got any questions. If there's anything you're looking at how the data might solve challenges you're working on at the moment. So yeah, just to say again, it's a webinar of a series of five webinars. This introduction today, and then four CPD accredited ones to follow. And we're really looking to pick out the key themes, looking at building attributes, address attributes, water, and then land. And there is more besides to pick out from the NGD, and we'll be looking at that in future webinars and look at it also in the context of case studies later. And so yeah, so these events are CPD accredited, but there is actually a live event as well, which Ordnance Survey are kindly hosting us in Southampton. And we've got Rob Wingfield from Ordnance Survey with us today, and he'll be actually presenting sort of the core information on the product. But at Ordnance Survey HQ, you'll have a chance to find out more about the data sets, find out more from ourselves, and actually some of our suppliers as well. So you can look at not just Ordnance Survey data, but also how you can then combine that with other information, or if you're looking at challenges around utilities, land development, biodiversity, net gain, all these kind of topics that we're all working our way through at the moment. So that's in Southampton, and it's early July, and the QR code on the screen, and hopefully there'll be a link in the chat as well that you can follow if you're interested in coming along. It's always interesting to be able to visit the OS headquarters anyway, and you will get a nice tour if you're interested in that. So hopefully you'll have a chance to join us. And so just before we get across to Rob, just to set a very quick bit of context. So when we think about Ordnance Survey mapping, apart from the lovely leisure maps that we're all familiar with for walking, if we start to think about the building kind of level of detail, where you're looking at property boundaries and really much more detailed information. Obviously, the paper maps were where it all started back in the 1800s when they first had the national coverages, and then in the 90s, really looking at the paper maps became a digitized version and picked up on in CAD, but with fairly limited attribution, and then went for a nice program of positional improvement to make sure it all aligned nicely to modern sort of GPS and positioning technologies. And then the data got enhanced to a seamless coverage to what we're familiar with today in terms of OS mass map topography layer. And obviously people are using that in CAD and GIS and taking prints, and that's great. And it has a set of complementary data sets as well, with address and other complementary data. But really, NGD sees a change where we're not just talking about a set of data sets that work together. We're talking about analytics ready data, where the whole collection of information is designed to work together. And actually, it is still critical that we provide the GIS and the CAD formats that everyone's familiar with, and the benefit from the extra attributes that are coming along. But there's also a new way of working with the data for those that really want to ask questions, maybe about a particular building and its relationship to other things around it. So the fact that you could visualize that on the map is not necessarily the only way that you're going to be able to access the information. So I don't want to steal too much of Rob's thunder. So I shall now hand over to Robert Winfield, and I'm sure you'll pick up on his enthusiasm for the product.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Andy, and great to be with you this afternoon. I hope you're all well. My name is Robert Wingfield. I'm a senior geospatial consultant at Ordnance Survey, and my role is to support organisations to maximise the value of Ordnance Survey data and services. So it's great to be with you today, and I'm keen to kind of initially in this webinar talk you through at a high level what's contained within the what the OS National Geographic Database is, and a little bit about what's contained within it before we then launch into those further webinars over the next few months, exploring in much more granular detail. So I'll just share my screen and make that full screen. There we go. So for those of you that don't know, just a little bit of a recap on who Ordnance Survey are. So we're a government-owned company. We sit under DSIT, the Department for Science, Innovation, Technology, and we're wholly owned by government. And the way that we work is if you're a member of the public sector, then you have something called the Public Sector Geospatial Agreement, which means you have access to Ordnance Survey data and services free at the point of use. And then we also have a fantastic partner network, of which CentiMaps is one of our many partners. And CentiMaps are absolutely fantastic to be working with. So a couple of key points about the work that Ordnance Survey does. So ultimately, we create the national map. We very much underpin the work that we do with that national mapping and that data infrastructure, mapping every feature of Great Britain with that precision and authority, and ultimately consistency as well, right across Great Britain, England, Scotland and Wales. We are very much underpinned by geospatial innovation and technology, going back to what Andy was saying a moment ago in terms of that sort of transition over the last sort of 30 years, very much now driving forward with regards to things like APIs, SDKs. We're also looking at 3D data, and increasingly now, as we move into this AI-driven world, we are in turn looking at AI-driven insights. We are also very much have a set of platform and products. That is the next generation of that is what we're talking about in this webinar series. So very much around the National Geographic Database, or NGD. In the past, we've very much been underpinned by Master Map Topography Layer and our Master Map series of products, which some of you might be familiar with. Master Map Topography Layer was released back in 2001. You don't want to know how old I was then, but let's just say that I was very, very young. And that just shows the huge success that Master Map has over its lifespan, over 25 years now. But that is very much sort of in its own right. But actually, we're now moving forwards. The world has changed since 2001. The geospatial world has changed since 2001 in particular, and the way that organizations are accessing and using data has fundamentally changed as well. And that's why one of the reasons why we've created the National Geographic Database, to make the data analytical ready, so you can utilize it for analytical purposes in the best possible way. More widely, we are very much have something called the National Underground Asset Register, which some of you might be familiar with. So that's very much a government-run scheme and program that we are the service owners for in terms of that sort of safe dig use case. So if you're digging up the ground from a utilities perspective, what about that safe dig view? So we're now looking underneath the surface as opposed to just those features on the ground, which is what Ordnance Survey is traditionally associated with. We also have a wide-ranging consultancy and international development. So I'm part of the Ordnance Survey's consultancy team. And so we very much work across government, across the private sector, public sector, but also internationally as well. And then the final bit on the right-hand side in terms of what Ordnance Survey does is the one that Andy mentioned initially, which is that very much that consumer engagement, which is a very small proportion of the Ordnance Survey business, but it's still, of course, really important, and the one that OS is most well known for, with our OS Maps app, leisure mapping, and the services that we offer through our OS Map shop, available on the shop part of our website. And that's actually quite a small proportion, as I say, of the OS business. It's less than 10%. So very much in terms of what we do overall is very much around that national mapping data infrastructure, serving UK PLC overall, and really thinking about the future of that geospatial innovation technology. And the way that has really come about is through the National Geographic Database, which is what I'll be talking a little bit about today. So as I mentioned, so what is the NGD? Well, as I say, is an analytical ready database, and the way that it's structured is in 9 themes. So rather than taking like a static product that you might have taken previously, like Master Map Topography Layer or something like that, where it's like a static sort of base map, instead the NGD is designed to be analytical ready, and there's a bit of a more of a plug and play mixture of themes and collections and feature types, and ultimately the features contained within those with regards to your specific use cases. And centre maps are ideally set up to support you in maximising the value contained within those different themes, collections and feature types. And in the webinar series coming up, we'll talk a little bit about some of the different themes that are within, but today I'm just going to give you a bit of a teaser as to what that looks like. But ultimately the story here is moving away from that sort of static product, but actually being more aligned to analytical data. So it doesn't necessarily have to be viewed on a map. In many cases, this data is designed more for database ready work, or for analysis, or for insight. So creating sort of yes, no answers, and really making it a bit more AI ready as well in terms of that generation of ideas and insight beyond an initial sort of map that you might be more familiar with. So I say it's all about a database. We all love visuals, so let's make it a bit more visual as well, because of course, as it's geospatial data with geometry, so with coordinates, you can visually view it on a map, and it's a combined mixture of these that then really generates that insight and that power. So ultimately, the National Geographic Database is that granular view. So our Ordnance Survey's most granular view of data of Great Britain, that are forestative data describing the geography of Great Britain. And the way I've kind of split this out here is into the number of those themes and collections that make up the structure of the NGD. And let's talk about a couple of these in turn. And of course, as Andy mentioned earlier, the following 4 webinars deep dive into a few of each of these in turn. But I just want to call out a couple of these initially. So ultimately, in the top left-hand corner, we've got address data, an address being underpinned by the unique property reference number. And ultimately here is all about that interoperability, being able to link data with other data sets. So being able to link the UPRN, unique property reference number, that address data that's coming from local authorities and coming from Royal Mail, being able to cross-reference that, for example, with buildings information, so that yellow one along the top there, and understanding the wealth of attribution on the building, using that cross-reference back to the address, back to that UPRN, being able to pull out that insight on the building. And I can talk through some of the attribution and how that's derived in the buildings webinar later on. But then in turn, being able to cross-reference that with things like postcode information and administrative and statistical units when it comes to things like boundary information or constituency or local authority or ward information is immensely powerful as well. Some of you, particularly if you're planners or architects and that sort of side, will want to understand the land use as well. So that function of the economic activity taking place on that area of land, that brown one in the middle, and understanding how to access that area of land as well. Understanding the addresses contained within that land or the buildings contained within that land alongside that classification of land use becomes immensely valuable in bringing all of that insight together for your use case, whether that's planning, whether that's architecture, whether that's development, whatever that might be. And in turn, actually thinking about that in terms of a structures and perspective as well. So understanding the network representation of what a network under or over a structure is important to then consider alongside that too, as well as the land cover, particularly both from a residential perspective in terms of that land cover on the left-hand side there, on that green one, alongside also at a more rural perspective, understanding that land cover when it comes to habitat information and things like that too. And then alongside that, it's important to consider transport information. We haven't necessarily going to deep dive into transport in these webinars, but I can specifically state that some of that might be important if you're looking at that sort of road scene, particularly the transport features or maybe the transport network in terms of things like pavement information or speed information. But then in turn, actually considering things like the water network and the water features from a water and hydrological and planning perspective is really important. Things like flood risk, flood management, alongside some of the other OS products that are outside the NGD, such as Terrain 5, which you might be familiar with as a terrain data set, and that sort of DSM sort of view there too. So ultimately, the message I'm trying to show here is that the idea is that the NGD is very much interoperable, linking different data sets within the NGD together to really provide that sort of granular analytical output that is ultimately insight for your use cases. So rather than just that static map, which of course is still available, we've currently got master map topography layer still around. It's still going to be around for a few more years, and then we've got the next generation of master map coming in the future, which is the OS Basemap Pro that's coming in the next couple of years, and that in turn will really be around that digitization and visualization use case, whereas the data you're seeing in the NGD is very much designed for that analytical use case that we're talking about here. So just to really bring that analytical use case to life. So I thought, whilst that's a brilliant overview, it would be great for the rest of this webinar today, just give a bit of a brief teaser as to what's in some of these. And then what we'll do in the future webinars is to really go into a bit more detail, a bit more about into some of these themes in a lot more detail, and start to really see how some of the data is created, the wealth of attributes contained within them, and the value and the that brings to some of your use cases. So to start with, just to kind of give that teaser view, let's talk a little bit about address data. So the way that Ordnance Survey address data is captured is using PAF data from Royal Mail, that's a postcode address file, utilising local authority information from the local authority's land LLPG, that's the local land property gazetteer, alongside Ordnance Survey captured addresses. We can then really bring that insight in terms of the complete life cycle of a unique property reference number, the UPRN, which is a unique identifier for an addressable property. And that's going at cross-reference from that's a life cycle of a pre-build address, so a property that's not yet built, it's got planning permission, through to understanding a built address that's alive and can receive mail. Things like non-addressable objects, so things like ponds and post boxes, good luck delivering post to them. A pond, a letter might get a bit soggy. And then also things like historic addresses as well that have been demolished and are no longer existing. We've also got street addresses, because little known, but all streets have addresses as well. And actually bringing out the richness of the classification information and other information contained within the address is immensely powerful for those use cases. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview about the richness and actually that combination of Royal Mail data, that unique geocode or the classification of the UPRN and that geometry of the UPRN, and then being able to cross-reference that UPRN with multiple different sources is really important. And the UPRN has now been mandated, particularly within government, is increasingly being used within the private sector as well as that unique identifier for property information. But ultimately then a lot of people seem to love postcodes. So I just wanted to call out the postcode data we now have in NGD. So this is in the form of postcode unit areas and postcode unit points. And what we've nearly done is really brought that out in terms of understanding against that real world. So on the left-hand side, you can see one of our historic products called Co-Point with Polygons, which doesn't really conform to things like buildings. But on the right-hand side, we've got what we now call postcode unit areas within the NGD, and is much more analytical ready, and using those points and polygons to really provide that insight in terms of against things like building features and the address points to really provide that insight. I should stress though that postcode areas are really only useful for one thing, and that's really around delivering post and that postcode information. To really kind of get into that granularity of the detail, I would strongly recommend utilizing the UPRN and the addressing data solutions that are available and the cross-referencing from address rather than from the postcode. But of course, if you are a postcode fanatic, then do feel free to make use of them. But I should stress the use case there. Postcodes are very much around delivering post. They're not really designed for other sort of administrative uses, but I appreciate that many people do use postcodes for those use cases. So that's why I stress that. But postcodes and statistical units are really important. And then also similarly from a buildings insight. So I mentioned about that cross-reference from an address to a building. I'm not, of course, going to go through all of these now, but these are the wealth of analytical attributes. In total, we've got over 80 attributes against an individual building in the NGD. And these are many of those attributes that are coming through there. We've then got confidence indicators against some of these, provenance attribution, so the source of the information that's coming through as well as a lot of cross-references on the individual building and the building part that's contained within that things like building access locations as well, and building line if you're more interested in showing the visualization and overhangings of buildings. We've got those as well. But ultimately, there's a lot of analytical attribution around the roof, green roofs, solar panels, roof materials, roof aspects and shape, and then also around the physical structure of the building in terms of the construction material, the connectivity of the building, whether it's connected to other buildings, and things like building age as well, and the building use as well being really important. Alongside things like basin presence, incredibly important, things like flood risk, flood mitigation, as well as height and floor information as well. So that's a bit of a teaser. If some of these attributes are kind of bouncing out, thinking, oh yes, that would be great for your use case, whether that's around architecture, whether that's around planning, resilience, whether that's around flood risk management, maybe you're interested in terms of understanding which buildings are suitable for solar panels or green roofs based on their roof aspect or shape of roof material, then I'll be talking through some of those use cases and examples in the buildings webinar coming up in a few weeks' time. So I don't want to spoil the fun for that, but do make sure you sign up for that webinar in a few weeks, because we'll be talking a lot more detail about some of these attributes and how you can start to apply that in real world scenarios. For example, if you're interested in identifying buildings suitable for solar panels or around basement presence when you're looking at flooding, then do make sure that you have a listen to that webinar coming up and take advantage of that. But ultimately, the reason why we're showing here is about the interoperability. So being able to link the UPRN to the building so you can understand which commercial residential addresses are contained within a particular building. And that's really, really important. And then aside from that, I suppose it's then understanding, okay, you then got the function of an area of land, so a land use site, and understanding, okay, what are the addresses and what are the buildings contained within that site, and giving that sort of geospatial context to what's going on in that area of land. Maybe you're looking at a new construction site, maybe doing some development, maybe you're looking again at something like flood risk, or you're looking at the that sort of architecture taking place on that site. It's really important to think about the function, think about the addresses contained within it and the buildings contained within it, and ultimately the site access locations as well. So what are the vehicular points to get into that site? What are the pedestrian access points as well? I should make one thing really clear here. I'm not talking here about HMLR data, so land registry. Land registry, of course, focus very much on ownership. That's their bag, whereas we at Ordnance Survey are focused on the real world features on the ground, which is in many cases sometimes quite different to ownership. So we're looking at the function of the area of land. Function is different to ownership. So if you want the ownership, that sort of title data, then please do keep going to HMLR. In many cases, however, in urban areas, it should be made clear that particularly in, for example, of terraced residential property, it might well be the case that the HMLR ownership polygons actually overlaps pretty much exactly with the Ordnance Survey sites data, simply because of the sort of the real world features that make up that, and that's then being used to delineate the ownership quite commonly, because HMLR utilize Ordnance Survey data for a lot of their uses. So there are some similarities, but they have two very distinct purposes and are designed in two quite distinct ways. So just bear that in mind if you're a big fan of using the HMLR polygons. But the land use sites, as I say, is really important for interoperability and understanding the function of that area of land. And then just to showcase that in terms of linking that data together, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not personally a big fan of postcodes. So I've kind of got this example here showing a postcode area and showing the analysis that you could do. So let's say, for example, that blue area that's in these boxes is a flood zone area. Let's say, for example, looking at the postcode area, you would then see, okay, we're both within and outside that flood zone area. That's not very useful in just looking at the postcode, but what is useful is then looking at the individual address points. So you then see in box 2 on the top right hand corner, you can then see the classification of the addresses. You can see a number of commercial addresses, a number of residential addresses contained within that flood risk area, as well as some pre-build addresses. So understanding that life cycle of the address is really, really important. In box 3 on the bottom left, we can then take that a step further. So not just understanding the classification of the address, but then understanding the building information. So what's the doing that cross-reference to the building and the wealth of attribution I mentioned on the building earlier as well, in really understanding that building data coming through there, and again understanding that against that life cycle information as well. And then you can take that a step forward by understanding the land use, so that land use site data. So what's the function of that area of land against that land, against the address in the building data, as well as against that actual underlying flood zone polygon as well. So, and that really gives you that sort of context of what's taking place on the area of land. In this case, it looks like we've probably got some kind of business park, got a number of, or industrial park, got a number of commercial addresses here, and then you can start to model that flood risk against those addresses, those buildings, and that land use site as well, and use that for modeling and analysis. So using that powerful data interoperability, using those identifiers contained within the data, whether that's OSIDs contained within the NGD or things like UPRNs, you can then link the data together to really provide that granular view. And that goes that step further, or quite a significant step further, than just using the postcode area for something like flood risk, which on its own doesn't really get you very far. So hopefully this shows you how you can get a lot further and do some really powerful analysis. Also, you can take that again, as I say, a step further by making use of the NGD land data. So this is very much that biological surface of the land, and understanding that both in terms of arable lands like fields, but also against things like the road verges, or what we call transport curtilage, as well as on top of things like structures and alongside the water as well. We've also got habitat mapping against this, and percentage coverage of habitat mapping against particular areas of land. I will go into this in a bit more detail in a future webinar, so if you've got any questions then I look forward to hearing those in future. But just to kind of showcase the granularity and of the habitat mapping, going out a sort of step further than just saying that an area of land is arable, we're going a step further than that and describing what's taking place on the area of land from the habitats in a lot more detail. One of those that can be done is by understanding the field boundary. So you can understand field boundaries in terms of tree canopies or strips of wood, hedges and walls, or fences, or what we would call other, because it might not necessarily be a fence, but usually they are. So understanding that field boundary data is immensely important for things like biodiversity net gain, as well as that habitat coverage I mentioned a second ago. And similarly, in our structures data within the NGD, we're also looking at bridges and tunnels and things like that, and the type of network that might pass under or over a bridge. And we've got a couple of examples here in Newcastle, where you can see that a railway line is going over the bridge, or a road, or multiple features going over a bridge, or a footpath. And then similarly, you can look at what's going under a bridge as well. So that is immensely useful in terms of understanding that architectural or that planning perspective, in terms of what's going on there. I won't touch on transport too much, but just to showcase that we have got a number of transport collections in the NGD, particularly looking at the features on the network. So the features being that sort of topographic view of understanding the road tracks and paths and the rail detail, and then similarly the network on the right hand side for that more of a network routing sort of tool. So being able to route things like the transport network paths, ferries and railway lines as well. If that's of interest, that very much is part of the NGD. And just to showcase that in a bit more detail here, you can see on the left-hand side the descriptors of some of those attributes within the road track or path. And on the right-hand side, really showcasing some of that pavement attribution that we now have. So things like minimum and average width of the pavement, really useful for things like safe routes to schools, really useful for understanding the context of like a new development as well, and understanding that pavement attribution and the percentage coverage along a particular road link. So in other words, between two junctions, what's that coverage of that pavement along that road link? We do have a lot more granular detail on our NGD transport data. I won't go into that too much today, but if you've got any questions or you'd like to go in more detail, then please do reach out. Very happy to talk you through it in more detail, and we've got a wealth of resources on our website as well. Just to finish a little bit by talking about water. So we've got water features and water network. I do love the fact that we can route water, so it's quite fun, and it's really useful for that sort of network representation and that sort of flood modelling and risk management view. Against sort of like understanding that heighted view of the water is really important as well, which comes through in that water network data. We've also got a wealth of data on the water catchments, intertidal lines as well, in terms of we're particularly interested in the coastal zone. So we talking through a lot more in the water webinar coming up in a few weeks' time, but that's very much focused again on that network representation and the individual polygon features, things like lakes and rivers. There you can see on the screen there in green. I'm really showcasing that way to kind of understand that the width and the topographic view of the water network there. So I've covered quite a considerable comprehensive view of what's in the NGD as a bit of a starter for 10, and hopefully showcasing what's available. We can then go into a bit more detail in the webinars coming up. But just to showcase some of the things that we've improved in the NGD or released into the NGD in terms of the new data, because it's all about new and exciting data that we've been releasing. So we've released recently attributes on the physical state of a building, as I mentioned, intertidal areas and tide lines. We've included some attribution on vacant and derelict land, particularly in the NGD land use sites data, that function of the area of land. We've also released in address a full copy of Royal Mail's postcode address file into the Royal Mail address feature type. I mentioned earlier about postcode polygons and points, which is new as of a couple of weeks ago into the NGD. And then we've also recently released some data on retail areas as well. So that kind of gives you analytical insight and visual insight in terms of where retail areas are within Great Britain. We've released data on bus lanes and cycle lanes and some new attribution on river widths as well. And then as a bit of a side point, as I mentioned earlier, NGD data is very much designed for analytical purposes. So it can be viewed visually, but it's not a contiguous base map, which some of you might be interested in as well. A contiguous base map is very much coming, and that's coming down the line is our OS Base Map Pro product that's coming along. That's very much in prototyping phase at the moment and will be coming out in due course as well. That's very much, as I say, designed for that visualization, digitizing, not really designed for those analytical use cases, which is what the NGD analytical data I've been talking about today is very much designed for. We've also got a couple of other prototypes, just so you're aware of what we're doing as well. But I should just say, and I'll show this slide in all of the webinars we've got coming up. I just want to showcase our documentation and what's available for you to explore, self-serve that anyone can access. Very much a number of tutorials in terms of exploring about how you can apply location data from Ordnance Survey to specific use cases, whether that's around hard-to-heat homes, whether that's about things like understanding data to apply to identify buildings suitable for solar panels. We've also got tutorials on understanding linking to green space, as well as multitude of others. We've got over 15 that are available on our website. We also have a multitude of technical documentation. We have some data viewers as well, so you can go in and explore the NGD and its attribution for Exeter, Newport and Inverness. And we have a wealth of tutorials, demonstrators, lightning talks and case studies available on the website as well as code examples and styling advice. And that's all available on docs.os.uk or via the QR code that's on the screen here. So please do take advantage of that and explore that in. There's a wealth of information there, which is really, really useful to take through, and as I say, I'll be mentioning some of that insight in some of the upcoming webinars as well. So that's, I suppose, the end of what I've got to present personally today. I've got my email address on the side there, but please do reach out if you've got any questions, and also very much do reach out to the wonderful team of Centre Maps, particularly Andy. Absolute wealth, very much keen to support Centre Maps and the wonderful work that Andy and the team are doing. And it's an absolute pleasure to be invited by Andy and the team to take part in these webinar series and to really showcase the value of the NGD for some of the use cases and what you're looking to do. I'm really keen to take this forward. Centre Maps are one of our absolutely key partners, and it's absolutely great to be working with Andy and the team. So I'll finish my slide deck there, and I'll hand now back over to Andy to take us through a couple of closing slides and working out what's next in terms of the upcoming webinars. So over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Rob. It's hard not to get infused with Rob's presentations. Always brings out something new as well that I haven't picked up on before. I think the something to say about NGD is, although it'll feel quite a new product to the private sector, it has been quite well tested in the public sector. So it's actually it's very robust. It's still got all that positional accuracy that you're familiar with from MasterMap, but now with an explosion of new attribution and ways to interact with the data. So the follow-up, the next webinar will be the 21st of April at 2 p.m. So just sort of 3 weeks away now, and it's well worth listening. To that, the building theme has really got some incredible detail in there, and there's some immediate ways of getting a deeper understanding of information beyond what was available in MasterMap. And it's interesting. I know Rob mentioned there the postcodes that literally I think went live 2 weeks ago, maybe, or a week ago. So it is constantly evolving, and I think that's one of the things we've seen behind the scenes going on is a lot where MasterMap has been incredibly robust for a number of years, and then new products have been launched alongside it. This rate of change with NGD of bringing new things with cycle lanes and bus lanes, all this kind of information coming online. It's really exciting to see how fast it's developing. So we're looking forward to sharing that with yourselves and working out, as we always do, how to make that accessible so that it's actually something you can really get hold of and make use of. So thanks again. Thanks very much to Robert. It really helped, and thanks very much for all of you for attending, and see you the next time. Thanks.